Hey, hello. Brent Leary here. It is a beautiful Wednesday afternoon here in Atlanta. It's like 65 and sunny. It doesn't get any better for February. It's just great. And that always, when the weather is good, when I feel the sun. I know it's going to be a great few good minutes. Not a good few good. Did I just say a great few good minutes? Yeah. Anyway, it's going to be a great several minutes here, and it always is when I have a chance to talk with Ron Miller, is the enterprise tech reporter at TechCrunch, and we usually end up talking about tech and the industry and all that. But let me just get this out of the way. Let me get Ron on right now, and let me say hello to Ron. And all right, let's get the Pat's documentary talk a little bit out of the way. I know you started watching it, so give us your take so far on the
I mean,
doc.
it's really good. It's really well done. A couple of things stand out though, is like, Bill Belichick was not quite as gruff with the press because they show a couple of press conferences, and I'm like, he's actually smiling and actually chatting with them. So
Wow,
that kind of gruff act that he put on with the press that came later. He was a lot
wow.
more soft around the edges in 2001 when he wasn't so sure of himself.
So after a couple of Super Bowls, he got really sure of himself, apparently.
I guess so. It was on to Cincinnati and all that stuff.
Well, look, I'm glad that you guys, you Pats fans, have something to watch because we enjoy.
So whatever's happening now is not good to watch.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so it's always a pleasure to have you join me
Nice to
and
be
to
here.
talk
Thank
what's
you.
going on. And I know we're going to be talking about. Oh, well, can anybody escape the Gen AI conversation
No,
and kind of how it's moving and shaking? So, um, it feels like every company, and let's talk about the big guys, the incumbents, the titans of the tech industry. um they're all saying things like this. Now, this particular quote, and I hope it shows up okay. It's not the doesn't show up as clear as I'd like to, but I took this quote, and this is a quote from a tech CEO, big tech CEO, company's huge. Generative AI is the greatest opportunity since the rise of the cloud. Now, that's saying quite a bit, because the iPhone came since the rise of the cloud, and all sorts of things have come since the rise of the cloud. But this particular CEO is saying it's Gen AI. It's not even just AI; it's Gen AI is the greatest opportunity since the rise of the cloud. Now, Ron, do you want to take a guess as to who might have said that? It's a tech CEO. It could be any of them because they're all saying this, but
was
who
it
do you think this
Satya?
was? That's a great guess. That's a great
Mhm.
guess. But
It was
Christian
Christian
Klein,
Klein.
and you notice,
Okay. All right.
and you notice I kept the last part out, especially for because every one of these CEOs would have said, especially for whatever
Right.
company they
Right.
represent. But it's the big companies that are talking about this. They're restructuring. They're moving around investments. They're changing the direction of their companies. Lots of emphasis on this opportunity that they say in front of them with Gen AI. But
Right.
it's not just these big companies, because you recently wrote about, well, somebody who did spend some time at a rather big company,
Yeah.
Brett Taylor,
He sure did.
and he left. He was under the radar for a while, but just recently he came up with his new company, Sierra, with his co-founder. I think he's also from Google,
Yeah,
and
Clay
you had a
Clayport.
yeah. So you had an opportunity to talk to them and get a sense for what they're doing, but also get a sense for the opportunity that they see in front of us. Maybe you could just fill us in on that conversation.
Sure. I mean, it was super interesting talking to them. Obviously, always interesting to talk to Brett, who's one of the big movers and shakers in Silicon Valley. When he left Salesforce last year, it was kind of a shock. It was actually at the end of 22, um, and then we heard in February that he and Clay had got together, but it was like, as you say, nobody knew exactly what they were doing. Clay's background is VR and AR, and there was a lot of speculation that it would be AI and having something to do with that. But what it turned out to be is what they're calling AI agents, and these are unlike, I mean, we've had like kind of bots that we speak to with varying degrees of success or failure when we interact with brands. And like you can ask the bot something like very simple, but if you had just actually searched Google, you would have found it in the FAQ or the website. And the bot generally didn't have trouble answering that. Some bots, like I point to the CVS pharmacy um, prescription renewal bot, has been very good for a while. It only has to do one thing, which is like get your prescription number and then look it up. Okay, yep, that's and then it tells you, asks you when you want it and blah blah blah. And it's been very good at it because it's a very kind of narrow task that it has to do. But a lot of times when you had anything that was complex, you need to speak to a human, and you still do. So their thesis is that they want to be able to have the bot do everything. They want you to be able to say, kind of out of the ordinary kind of request in plain English into a search style box. And the bot should be able to interpret that request, and it should be able to then interact with whatever transactional systems need to be interacted with to undertake the request, to complete the request. So, cancel your order or get into the order system, or, you know, um, uh, getting into the system that says where your package is, the logistics system, and saying this is when you can expect it, that kind of thing. Um, that's very hard to do, frankly, because
Mm.
first of all, it's the interpretation. Second of all, it's the connection, and third of all, it's the action. And um, they believe that these AI agents, unlike the bots that came before them, will be smarter and more interactive and more capable of completing these tasks, and that they will become like this digital asset. I mean, you talked about like the cloud and mobile that came before it, the web came before that. People built websites, they built mobile apps. These are ways of interacting digitally with the brand, and they believe that these AI agents will be the next big digital asset and will transform customer experiences we know it, not just customer service, but the experience that the customer has with the brand. But it's a huge tall order, and there are a bunch of obstacles in the way, not the least of which is huge competitors, uh, including Brett Taylor's former company, Salesforce. And, the interaction with those systems is not a simple matter. There's the matter of things like hallucinations, which we can get into, but which can, if done poorly, can embarrass a brand or could, potentially be catastrophic to a brand, depending on what was said to the customer or promised to the customer. So these are some of the things that they have to think about, but they believe that it's an opportunity worth going after. And they've got a bunch of reference customers that they're working with. And, it sounds exciting, but the devil is definitely going to be in the details.
Right. But, as I was saying earlier about these huge companies, they see a huge opportunity from their perspective.
Absolutely.
They're investing heavily, they're restructuring, they've got tons of money at their disposal. I mean, you think about, companies like, just say Apple. I think they not only do they make a ton every quarter, they actually, their profit is like 20 billion every quarter. So these companies are like printing money. They are trying to kind of turn their ship to take advantage of all this. But yet and still, you said, Brett feels like, companies like his and maybe some others, the opportunity is there to do some really change the landscape, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think Clay said it when he said something along the lines. I'm paraphrasing him now, but um, that there are opportunities that come along in technology, and that sometimes smaller companies that are more agile and more creative can come up with solutions in ways that larger companies, which are handcuffed by their existing technologies and technology stacks, might have trouble kind of executing on. And there's two sides to that argument, right? One is the side that you just made, which is that they have such tremendous resources financially and in terms of engineering talent and the vastness of their engineering groups, and that, but there is something to be said. I mean, that's why there is such a thing as disruption, because um, you have to tread carefully as you move into these new territories, and and in some ways you can be handcuffed even if you foresee the change, which I think certainly that quote from Christian shows that SAP does. We know that Mark Benioff certainly sees what's happening. I mean, as early as last May, which was a few months after ChatGPT came out, I was at Salesforce's event in New York, and it was just all generative AI, and they had to completely transform their plan, because there's no way these things are planned months and months in advance. So their agenda had to be completely reworked to
Yeah.
talk about how they were going to deal with generative AI and how their data cloud was going to be involved with all the data that's needed for this. And these people, these companies have tremendous resources with which to battle these um, startups, but the startups, especially ones with the pedigree of these guys, and they have $110 million already, to go after the problem. That's not billions, but
Right.
it's not chicken feed either to start an early stage company.
Are you seeing any other companies like these startups maybe with some level of pedigree with their founders, with some level of resources in terms of money that you think are have some potential, maybe along the lines of what Sierra is doing, maybe not doing the exact same thing, but doing some interesting things that could potentially shake things up?
Well, I mean, I don't know that they have, the background of Brad and Clay, who had, 20 years in the in the technology industry, working for some of the biggest companies in the world. And in Brad's case, he moved through, some major companies at different
Right.
stages of their development. He was with Facebook at a time where they were still fairly small, as their CTO, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, but I look at a couple of companies that I wrote down before the show, and one is a company I talk to from time to time called Ryder, which is Canadian, and they're creating customized models that work um, with companies, uh, language and lexicons, and like customizing their models to create writing that is in their tone, their voice, their language. And the CEO of that, her name is May Habib. And in many ways, May reminds me of Aaron Levy like 15 years ago, when he was, out everywhere talking about, the cloud, and how the cloud was going to change content management, and how things were. He had a very high profile and had a lot of energy, and she
Right.
does too. She has a lot of energy. She's very articulate, and she shows up at a lot of events, and it's kind of pushing the idea of this, not just her company, but the industry and the category, to a wider audience. And so I think that they just raised, I think, 100 million, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check on that, but I think they did last fall. So that's one company that kind of came to mind. Another is Forethought, which is a former Battlefield winner, and the CEO is Dion Nicholas, and he yeah, he again is a person who gets out there, and they've been sort of working on customer service bots for a while, kind of the original AI driven customer service bots. But now, of course, with generative AI, they've built their own models, and they're working to kind of bring that into the more you know how we think of this now,
Right.
and they're moving quickly. So these are smaller companies, but they're well capitalized, and that they've been moving, as as smaller companies. I think they're not Salesforce, they're not
Right.
Google, they're not
Right.
Meta, not even. I mean, only, I guess, OpenAI, which is like the most unusual startup. It's not even really a startup, I guess. Um, it's sort of like was like instead of being born as a baby, it was born as like a teenager,
Right.
and now it's a full-grown adult.
It really is. And of course, part of that story is Microsoft's kind of early partnership with them and investment in them. Do you see, that for some of these the smaller companies, do you see the relationship between the tech titans and maybe these upstarts? Do you see a relationship that could form similar to what OpenAI and Microsoft has?
I
Or
don't know.
do
I
you
think that's pretty unusual.
Okay, okay.
And on one hand, that has given Microsoft a huge head start in this, right? And when you look at the cloud infrastructure numbers, it's really driving revenue for them to their cloud services. Um, and I mean, they grew 2 percentage points of market share in in the last quarter, which is just an enormous. I mean, I can't state how unusual it is to grow that big, to close the gap that much in one quarter. So so on that hand, and in the short term, this relationship with OpenAI has been tremendously lucrative for them. But you have to wonder, this is early days. I mean, everybody always says it's early innings. We're in the second inning, using our baseball metaphors. It's early in the first quarter, using our football metaphor. Uh, but, there's lots of time on the clock. um, but there is. And this is really, really early. And, the first movers typically in a market in startups have a tremendous advantage. And we've seen that with Amazon in the cloud for all these years, right? I mean, they came out first. They've had a tremendous advantage in doing that. And I mean, if you look over the last 5 years in the cloud market, uh, you know, Amazon has basically maintained the percentage wise, the market share that it has always had, right? Around a third. That number has grown because the size of the market has grown.
Right.
But the percentage wise, it has pretty much stayed steady in an uncanny way, right? Whereas Microsoft, which again, I mean, it's easier to start from small and grow more and grow faster. But I mean, they've closed the gap in a tremendous way. I mean, from the teens now into the mid 20s. So they're closing in. Whether the catching, the larger you get, the slower your growth goes, as Amazon has shown. They percentage wise, I'm talking about, not revenue wise,
Right.
because the revenue increases because the size of the pie increases,
Right.
and it just has continually done that. But the question is, are they too early? Are they is and I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm asking the questions. Is hitching your wagon to one model, is that the way to go? I mean, it is the way to go to get you out of the gate fast, and it's worked really well for them. But you have to wonder over
Mm.
time if that will handicap them in some ways. And I mean, we won't know until we, play this out over time.
Right.
But right now, it feels like Amazon is behind in this.
Yeah.
If it's a race, and if we look at it as a horse race, and that you know Microsoft feels, more like they're in a more mature space, and Google just released a bunch of stuff as well. So,
Right.
um, Amazon released Bedrock, which is a way to kind of interact with a bunch of different models, and that's their strategy right now. Um, you know, I've said this since reInvent. If we look back in a year or 2 years and everybody's saying like, oh, look at, you know, Amazon's playing catch up. Will it matter? I mean, we don't know, and we won't know until we get there.
Yeah, and it's so interesting with, and we're just mentioning like the two biggies in terms of, the AWS versus Azure, and how OpenAI has really helped Microsoft and Azure with the whole Copilot, piece, and kind of layering that on, and then being able to spread that across all their different products, which is really, yeah. It's I think it was, of course, a really good move up front, like you were saying,
Well,
and it
it gave them first mover advantage for sure. I
absolutely.
mean, in ways they couldn't have imagined when they first made the relationship. I think in 2019 was their first investment. Um, right now having, you know, kind of insider access to that technology is giving them a tremendous advantage.
And they were able to spread it across so many different things under their umbrella, because there's the more you spread this, the more data you have at your disposal, and the more you can analyze it, and let your co-pilot actually do things that might actually help some folks, which is all, I think, the key there.
But I want to point out, I read an article, I think it was last week in the Wall Street Journal, and it was talking to companies who had been using Copilot, which is Microsoft's Copilot,
Mhm.
um, with a variety of scenarios. And what they found was that it was at its best at like summarizing meetings in teams,
Yeah.
and like people didn't have to show up in the meeting, and they could just come in and say, tell me what happened in the meeting yesterday, and tell me if there are any action items for me, that kind of thing. And it could do it, and people love that, and it's already like become like for some people who are using it, uh like it's like part of their tool structure now. They, if they go to a meeting and there's already 12 people in there, they're going to say like, I don't have to be a 13th person in here. I'm just going to summarize it later. And so
Yeah.
that has been like the most successful, but people would talk about using an Excel or PowerPoint are not as complementary, and they're finding that it's not as good yet, or not as useful. So you have this kind of one scenario that's kind of playing out, the meeting summary, which seems like, you know uh, might be the lowest hanging fruit here.
I think
um,
you're right. It is the lowest hanging fruit, and I think in general, that's what I hear. The summarizations is the thing that it does best. Like, I know I use it for, I take recordings of these shows and I upload it to something called Opus AI, and it does a great job of not picking nuggets that they think, based on their virality score, will resonate with the audience, and it also summarizes and gives you an explanation why. I think you're right. I think, generally speaking, that's the best thing from a like an enterprise perspective kind of thing. I think that's what it does best right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, a couple weeks ago, Slack released Slack AI, and what they're doing is, summarizing. Um, you know, I I've been out of the office for a week on vacation. You come back and there's a channel full of chatter. You know, give me the highlights.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like saves you like having to read, you know, pages of dialogue,
yeah,
and just give me the highlights, and is there anything I need to do? You know, so what do I need to know about? And so, I mean, I think that those kinds of scenarios, and I mean, I use Otter AI. Um, it's starting to create this summary with an outline of what the highlights were. In addition to the transcript. Um, it's it's not something, I think it's something that's going to be much more helpful for people who are doing business meetings than it is somebody who's looking for quotes for an article. But
yeah.
it is a similar kind of usage scenarios. But the fact that those other things are not doing as great, you know that's a problem. And then there's the hallucination problem, which we kind of alluded to on the top. And
Yeah.
this article talked about how one one customer said, in the summary, it talked about Bob said this, and there was nobody named Bob at the meeting. So
Jesus.
that can be problematic. When Bob has action items and he doesn't exist.
Yeah. I don't think those action items are going to get done. But
Probably not.
so Alan is saying, yeah, highlights is the next step after search. Enterprise search is not great. Will this help? You know what? I think this is why I think what you discussed with the folks at Sierra and what the enterprise the enterprise has specific big needs, like there is a need from a productivity standpoint to help with this summarization and even going a step further what Alan is saying, enterprise search, um whereas these smaller nimble companies, they can concentrate on certain use cases that maybe the big guys aren't really focusing in on right now, and that gives them a really great opportunity. Because I like the what you said, and what they said with Sierra. Right now these bots are very one dimensional, so to speak. Like, you can ask them to do one, it's almost like it's not a conversation, it's like a request, and they fulfill the request. But if you need to go beyond just, if they need a little bit more information, or you really need to explain a complex situation, you're not going to explain it to right now the today's bot. But if they're working on something that it brings real conversation to this AI agent in a way that allows people to get beyond the kind of the first line service request to really being able to solve more complicated, complex issues that we all have, that's something that is much harder for the enterprise to focus in on, given all the other things that taking place right now.
Right. I mean, and I think that, it's a source of frustration for customers. And I can say it is for me personally, um, when it takes hours, sometimes dealing with customer service over several phone calls to get something resolved. And then finding that, your request wasn't implemented
Jeez.
correctly, and it's very frustrating. And, I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was on the phone with my insurance company, and I wanted a bit of information that should have been easy to find, and I went to the website, and the website had every scenario but mine. you know and and so I was like, you know I gave feedback to the website. I actually said, you're missing this scenario, and then I called, and I was put on hold,
Oh.
and they had what wasn't unpleasant hold music, but they interrupted it like every 5 seconds with, "You're on hold, you know,
Like you didn't know that.
we will get to you as soon as we can." And then we'll be like, dun, 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 "You're on hold."
That's just annoying.
I was like tearing my hair out. And I'm like, no wonder like people are aggressive and angry by the time they get to the human, right?
Right.
And this was a case where the AI agent would have been like, "This is my situation. Like, what do I need to do?" And it would have, because the woman who answered my question answered it. She knew it immediately. It wasn't a complex question. It just wasn't on the website.
Wow.
so I mean, and that would have been like a softball for for these AI agents.
Yeah.
There are a lot more complex problems that you have. I mean, even they have Sonos as one of their reference customers, and I know, like setting up wireless speakers is not a slam dunk. I don't know if you've done it, but it's not.
Oh, yeah.
So you can have these agents walk you through something like that, for instance,
Yeah.
which would take a phone call and wait, and then explaining the problem, and you know, or I've done this, like it's still not working. What do I do? What's my workaround? You know, if you have something that you could ask questions to and answer them, I mean, it would be tremendously valuable,
Yeah.
and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think I think there's a place for both the startups that have the right kind of experiences in their background and are attacking certain use cases. I think there's a definite opportunity. I do think, beyond the let's say, financial resources that a lot of the incumbent tech titans have, they also have these huge customer bases and partner relationships that I think I know SAP said they're going to be
I saw
using
that.
those kind of, yeah. So there are those kind of advantages that these
Right.
bigger companies have over these the small startups too, right?
Oh yeah, I mean you can't discount that. And if you're looking at this as a data play, and it is very much a data play, then if you can team up, and SAP can get some industry specific data from a partner, and combine that with customer data, and then like you know and we were going to talk about using multiple models, but as companies use multiple models, purpose kind of more like combining different models, to create something. That's what Sierra is actually doing under the hood. um,
Mm,
you know you you start to see the advantage of having access to that data. Of course, Sierra, if they can convince potential customers to come on board, then they'll be dealing. They'll get access to that data as
right,
well.
right.
And as they become more successful, and given the who these guys are, and the connections that they have in the community and in the industry, I again, it's sort of like Sam Altman at OpenAI. These are people who had, tremendous advantages when they started the company, because they already have these you know interconnections, intersections, inside the wider industry. And I mean, for Sam, it ended up with a huge, relationship with Microsoft. And I think you'll see. I mean, I don't know that they'll like hitch their wagon to a big company, but I think you'll start to see them partnering with these larger companies, to have that data access, because it is going to be very much a data driven process.
Man, do you see? I mean, given like some of the technologies involved, you mentioned, there's LLMs, there's medium language models, there's small, there's narrow at this point. And do you think we're going to see the bigger companies focus some of their effort on acquiring and acquisitions, or are they going to be more partnership kind of things? Because it doesn't feel like there's been a huge number of acquisitions so far in
They
this
have
space.
been, but they're
Oh,
small,
okay,
so
okay.
like I forget what I mean, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but like Apple bought a bunch of small AI companies last year.
Wow.
They all did. And what they're essentially doing is buying knowledge and acqui-hiring, and getting this kind of body of knowledge in house, and
Mm,
and this so and so we're seeing that. I think we're seeing both. We're seeing companies partnering widely. I mean, you saw, you know, um, while Amazon doesn't have a relationship with OpenAI direct, they do have with Anthropic and some of the
right.
other large language model vendors. So you're starting to see, like, you know, and I forget who Google connected with, but they invested like a bunch of, well, not a bunch of money. It wasn't like the amount of money that Microsoft invested into OpenAI, but these these companies are investing several $billion, which to us, of course, is a lot of money, but in the AI investment game is a modest investment.
Right.
um, but there's just so much money required to run these things. But we're seeing this widely partnering amongst the larger players. We're seeing these larger players buying small AI companies, and I think you'll definitely see more and more of that throughout this year and next year.
So I got to ask, because you've been covering this space for decades, do you feel like, of course, I've been around as long with that gray in my beard. Do you see it as everybody else seems to see it as this is the biggest opportunity since the cloud? Because it seems like from big companies to small companies, they're all kind of in agreement with that.
So there's something I've been thinking about lately, and partly I had a chance to demo the Apple Vision Pro a couple of weeks ago. So you have two um, kind of big platformy things happening right now. You have these AI agents and generative AI, and um, you have spatial computing, and that's what Apple is calling, um, you know, because you put on these glasses, you can see the room around you, and you can basically make the room your screen. So I
Right.
mean, there's lots of interesting and creative things you could think to do with that. Once you have this huge space to work with, and they're calling it spatial computing. And um, last year we heard about the metaverse and Web3, and it was all we heard about, but there wasn't much there, right? I mean, it was. So now we have this year we have spatial computing, and we have generative AI and AI agents, which is what you know Clay and Brett are kind of naming this technology. So you have this kind of new wave of hype, right? and but you know, AI feels like there's something substantial that's going to change how we interact with computers, how we interact with software, whether it's through those glasses, whether it's how we are used to interacting online. Maybe we have these intermediaries, these digital intermediaries. Um, so that could be one of those pivotal moments. But
Mm.
again, it could be nothing. It could be a lot of hype. It could be that you know, you know, 500,000 people buy these classes, but it never ends up, becoming an enterprise tool in
Right.
any kind of major way any more than it has already, frankly. I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
of proof of concepts, there's a lot of things around design and field service, and
Yeah.
there are these things, these use cases we've been hearing for years when it comes to metaverse or spatial computing or virtual reality, augmented reality, however you want to label it. And the question is whether this device and the way they present it, they being Apple, will change that. And then we have had AI for years with task-based models, and a lot of nuts and bolts and a lot of tooling and plumbing that's been created. And then suddenly we have generative AI, and generative AI is big. I mean, you'd be foolish to say it isn't, but there's still a lot of proof that needs to be done. I think, what did I say at the end of the article I wrote over the weekend? That they have to prove that they can do it, and they have to prove that it's repeatable and scalable,
Right.
right? So it's one thing to say, oh, you can put this box in front of, um, PowerPoint, and it'll build my presentation for me. But it's not quite there yet. And even Jared Sporetto, when asked by um, the Wall Street Journal journalists, said, "Well, those are a little behind. Those are a little still." And so there's always like these levels.
Right.
But will they actually be able to do this at scale? Will somebody be able to walk up to a prompt and say, "I want a presentation tomorrow, and I want you to find." This information from this system and this information from this system, and I want you to make these intelligent sounding slides that sound like they came from me, right? And that they sound like my company.
Hmm.
And this is a hard problem to solve. And it's not only hard because it has to go to these other systems and then draw conclusions and make decisions, but then it also, has the hallucination problem. So it could, if it doesn't get it, say, oh, I'm going to say that we had X number of dollars in sales to this company last year, and maybe you never even dealt with that company. I mean,
Right.
there's like there's like all kinds of things that can go sideways, and
Yeah.
so that's the big wild card in all of this.
Yeah.
And then again, you know, when we see this stuff, we hear lots of pilots, we hear lots of we're playing with it, we hear lots of stuff like that. When we have companies, large companies, implementing this at scale, and it's working, and it's improving productivity, and it's providing a way to get work done that we couldn't do before in a better way, in a more cost efficient way, then we're somewhere. But so far, we're not there. We're we're
Yeah.
in a state where we're thinking, "Wow, we could do this, and wouldn't it be great if it could do this? And boy, if it can do this, then this is going to be fantastic." But it's we're not there yet, and we won't. Again, talking about all of this, we're at the very edges of what we know this can do or what it could do, and we have to see what it can do over time and
Mhm.
how these big companies and these newer companies and companies we probably haven't even seen yet are going to go after these problems.
Yeah. So, after this conversation, I remember, I think I titled this, will the startups, do they have the opportunity to change the kind of the technology landscape? And my answer is to that, to my own question, I guess, is yes. Not to say that they're going to completely overtake the big enterprises, but I think the combination of the new direction that these enterprises are going and the smaller startups are going to force, because they're going to identify things that maybe are not or overlooked, or maybe not just high up on the priority list, but for them it's the priority list,
Or
and
just
they have the
implement it in
opportunity.
a way that the other companies didn't think about, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
that they came up with a concept or a process or a way of doing things or a way of solving the problem, whatever that problem happens to be. Because AI is this big nebulous thing, right? I mean, it has to be applied to something, and it's
Yeah,
solving a problem. The thing that's interesting about Sierra is that it's attempting to solve a very big problem that has haunted, large companies to this day. In spite of the advanced technologies that we've had and continue to have, you know, interacting with brands is still very difficult, and it's difficult for brands to present information in a uniform and accurate way in a consistent basis and in a way that you know gives people what they need and makes them feel good about their interaction.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
I
that's the
mean
key.
that's a big thing. And just what you said about can the small companies do it. One thing that Brett said to me in that interview that I had with him and Clay was he thinks that 5 to 10 new companies will emerge, not from just from generative AI, but I think from AI in general, that will be kind of like Salesforce, coming into SaaS
Wow.
in 99. And SaaS had been around and there were some smaller companies that were trying it, but you know, Salesforce was the kind of the first company or one of the first companies to really
They broke through.
yeah, they broke through, and
Yeah,
I mean, you were there, you know that. But yeah, they were able to change a paradigm of how we purchase software, and at a time where I remember going even, you know, 6, 7 years after they launched, being at a conference with a Salesforce guy, a Google guy, and who was the third guy? Amazon,
mm.
and and somebody, it was a conference and there was an open mic and somebody went up and they said something like, you know, I will give my data to you guys over my dead body. and, and
I remember
and
that.
it's like who doesn't use the cloud now? But in
Yeah,
2007 or 8, it was like you're giving your customer data
that's
to
true.
like
I
outside
remember those
people.
conversations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I
So,
mean,
so
it was
there,
revolutionary. So he thinks there'll be similar types of sea changes.
yeah. Well, so it may be a company that's not a known entity that has a breakthrough, like what you just explained. Because I remember those conversations. It's like the stuff was there, but until Salesforce came along and proved what they did was, hey, your data is going to be safe. You're going to be better off putting your stuff up here and letting us maintain it, and you can
Mhm.
worry about the business. So there's going to be, maybe there's a company that comes out of nowhere that does the same thing for these AI Gen AI agents. Where right now there's a lot of interest, but there's also a lot of a lot of apprehension because of, like you said, the hallucinations. Sometimes, I know a lot of these companies are working on their retrieval augmented generation stuff because you send that data out into the public and use public LLMs, it could come back, with all sorts of hallucinations or toxic responses. And until you can make sure that whatever you're putting back in front of either the agent or the customer is legit and non-toxic and 99.9999% of the time, people are not going to jump on the bandwagon as quick. But I think you're right. There's going to be it needs to be a Salesforce moment, for lack of a better way of putting it, that a company is going to have that breakthrough like Salesforce had back 25 years ago.
Right. And I mean, again, we won't know it until it happens. I mean, until
Yeah.
well after it happens. Um, we didn't know that Salesforce was, was going to grow into a company as large as it is. We didn't know that AWS would be the biggest part of, Amazon's business.
Right.
Um, these are things you don't know until years later. But you do have a lot of companies, as you say, big, small, probably operating out there under the radar that could be the ones that make that happen, and that's what makes it exciting to cover this
Yeah.
industry.
I was ready to say you sound just as excited now as you did years ago when we met, man.
It is. I mean, it's an exciting time right now. I mean, on one hand, I have my skeptic radar up, but on the other hand, if you're covering technology and you don't get excited about this stuff, why are you doing it?
Yeah. This would be a time that you should enjoy because it's coming fast, it's coming furious. And I just want to take back. Remember, Salesforce, the breakthrough that we just talked about, they are now the second biggest enterprise software company in the world.
Right.
There have been several companies that were before them and have come and have gone. The second biggest, if there's a breakthrough like that for an unknown company, that's going to be amazing.
It will be, but I mean, you have to figure that, generationally, they're going to be, as we have technological breakthroughs, whether it's AI, quantum computing, things that we can't even imagine yet, perhaps, that there are going to be companies that emerge from those waves of technology, just as there were, with the cloud and mobile.
Yeah. Or it could be a company that has been around for a long time that was known for one thing, and all of a sudden, NVIDIA is the poster child for AI and Gen AI from a technology and hardware perspective.
Right, for now,
For now, right? For now,
and because I think that, the big companies are very wary of their dependency on those chips, and I mean,
yep.
you're already seeing Microsoft and Amazon, and I mean, Google has had, their own AI chips for years. Um, that Meta just announced, I believe, that they're going to be creating some of their own chips. And Meta has always been about like controlling as much of the hardware stack as they could. So the fact that they were using NVIDIA chips was always a bit surprising,
Mm,
but it allowed them to get to where they are with their models,
yep.
and then now they're starting to look at investing in their own chips. So um, whether NVIDIA can maintain that kind of, I mean, I don't think anybody can maintain the kind of growth that they've been on over the last, 12 to 16, 18 months. But
Yeah.
at some point that has to level out. But, um, they are definitely in the right place at the right time right now.
Yeah. Fascinating to be what will we be talking about a year from now? Like how will the landscape of change just from now to then is going to be fascinating, I think.
Oh, things are moving quickly. That's for sure.
Ron, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time. I'll let you get back to writing and watching the documentary because I know
New episodes come out on Friday. So
there it is. All right. So, and of course, Ron and he's going to come back because we just talked about how much we want to look forward to see what happens. So we're going to be doing that from time to time.
you
So
bet.
thanks again.
Always
And
happy to be on here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thanks to everybody out there. Hey, Alan. Alan says one last thing. Alan says early leaders don't always win. Where's Netscape? The hell, you got a point there.
Yeah, but look at the guy who started Netscape.
Yeah, he's still a billionaire. He's doing pretty good for himself. So.
He's still a pretty big influencer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you aren't kidding. All right. So I will see you tomorrow for CRM Players. And until then, have a great day.
All right. Thanks.